For decades, American wheat was seen as the gold standard in global grain markets. Kansas hard red and North Dakota spring wheat, traded on the Chicago Board of Trade, CBOT, set the benchmark prices for international buyers ranging from bread makers to noodle producers. U.S. wheat was associated with high protein, consistent quality, and strong reliability, making it the go-to choice for nations across Europe, Asia, and Latin America. But something began to shift quietly in mid-2024, and by the summer of 2025, it became clear that a major realignment was underway. Now, nations like the Philippines, France, South Korea, and Mexico, once dependable U.S. buyers, are turning to Canada, Australia, and even Argentina for their wheat contracts. And this isn't just about who offers the lowest price. In fact, U.S. wheat prices on the CBOT dropped only about $8 to $10 per ton compared to Winnipeg futures over the same period, a small gap that wouldn't normally explain such a dramatic change in trade flows. So what's really happening? The answer lies in a growing crisis of confidence. The drop in demand for U.S. wheat is being driven by three major concerns: weakened logistical reliability, inconsistent quality certifications, especially related to environmental standards, and rising political instability in Washington that's making global buyers nervous. According to AgriPulse Data Services' Trans-Pacific Wheat Flow Tracker, one of the clearest signs of this shift showed up in the Philippines. San Miguel Foods, a key milling group in Manila and longtime buyer of U.S. wheat, especially hard red spring and soft white varieties, canceled its renewal for 110,000 tons of American wheat in March 2025. Instead, they signed a deal with Saskatchewan-based Viterra for 120,000 tons of Canadian winter wheat and added 40,000 tons of Australian noodle-grade wheat from CBH. One major reason was risk premiums. The Philippine Customs Authority updated its shipping insurance policies and began applying a political risk surcharge to dry cargo from the United States. That meant shipments from Seattle were tagged with roughly $410 per ton in insurance, compared to $225 per ton from Vancouver. The difference wasn't just shipping rates, it reflected how global shippers were pricing in the risk of delays or disruption at U.S. ports. Canadian and Australian shipments didn't face the same issues. A similar trend unfolded in France. In early 2025, U.S. wheat exports to France dropped to just 132,000 tons in a single quarter, the lowest in over 2 decades, while imports from Canada jumped to 218,000 tons. French millers still praised the protein content of U.S. wheat, but flagged problems with paperwork. Specifically, the U.S. hadn't established a compatible digital certification system for the EU's new carbon tracking requirements under the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism (CBAM), which started rolling out in late 2024. Without an approved protocol for ports like Chicago or Portland, U.S. shipments risked being flagged or held up at customs in Europe. By contrast, Canada's Ministry of Agriculture fully integrated its Ottawa Protocol with the EU's Traces system, providing QR-coded documents that showed verified carbon scores from farm to silo to port. French buyers saw these documents as low risk and easier to process, giving Canadian wheat a major edge. There were also concerns over chemical residues. A leaked memo from the French Millers Federation in April revealed that they had issued 3 formal warnings over potential glyphosate residue problems in American wheat. Canadian samples, on the other hand, showed much greater stability. In South Korea, the problem became even more technical. As part of its 2025 National Food Safety Plan, Seoul lowered its allowable glyphosate residue limit to just 30 parts per billion ppb. American shipments of hard red winter wheat often tested at levels between 200 and 400 ppb, well above the new limit. This led to a wave of precautionary rejections and port delays. According to USDA figures from late 2024, around 28% of U.S. wheat shipments to South Korea were subject to portside retesting, causing delays that frustrated shippers and buyers alike. While U.S. producers argue that their wheat remains top tier in many categories, it's becoming clear that the world's expectations are evolving. Buyers aren't just looking for protein levels or price. They want clean documentation, environmental transparency, and supply chains that don't leave them exposed to political shocks. And unfortunately, the US has fallen behind in all three areas. Meanwhile, countries like Canada and Australia have moved quickly to integrate carbon tracking tools, minimize residue risks, and present a stable political and regulatory face to the world. Even Argentina, despite its logistical challenges, is seeing renewed interest from buyers who are diversifying away from American wheat due to uncertainty. As global trade shifts toward transparency, sustainability, and predictability, America's long-held dominance in the wheat market is being tested. Whether it can recover that ground depends on more than weather and yields. It will require rebuilding global trust, upgrading certification systems, and proving once again that American wheat is not just high quality, but dependable in every way that matters to today's cautious and tech-savvy global buyers. Canada has made significant strides in securing global wheat markets, largely due to strategic reforms and innovative agricultural programs that are quietly reshaping international buyer preferences. One of the most impactful initiatives has been the Clean Farm Transition Program, launched in 2023, which helped reduce glyphosate usage by up to 45% across Canada's vast prairie regions. This reduction wasn't accidental. It was the result of deliberate policy and cutting-edge technology. A standout pilot project from the University of Saskatchewan used drone-based application systems and deterministic modeling to deliver highly accurate pesticide application, reducing residue risk with an impressive 90% accuracy rate. These efforts didn't go unnoticed. South Korea's Busan and Incheon wheat markets, once dominated by American suppliers, began shifting in favor of Canada. According to data from the Korea Food and Drug Safety Agency, Canadian wheat's market share in South Korea surged to 62% in just the first 5 months of 2025. The Parallel Economics Institute estimated that the U.S. lost approximately $410 million in wheat sales in the Korean market alone, a blow that, when calculated using standard economic multipliers, led to roughly 6,200 job losses in North Dakota, a state heavily reliant on wheat exports. Mexico also joined this silent shift, though for different reasons. Instead of pesticide residue or carbon compliance, Mexico pointed to growing logistical disruptions at the U.S. border. Over the past 5 years, political tensions surrounding immigration have led to increased inspections, mandatory X-ray scanning of food trucks, and stricter controls at key commercial crossings like Mesa and Laredo. These so-called food safety protocols, although publicly justified, have resulted in real-world backlogs averaging 12 hours or more per shipment, delays that completely undermine the just-in-time delivery systems that Mexican flour mills depend on. Meanwhile, Canada responded with precision. In early 2025, it signed a through-rail, fast-lane protocol that ensured uninterrupted wheat shipments from Alaska through Western Canada all the way to Baja California. As a result, Canada's wheat market share in Mexico shot up by 38% by the end of May, while the U.S. share fell from 32% to a mere 17%, according to customs and industry sources. Back in the U.S., the fallout has been significant. Kansas Wheat Commission figures showed that state silo stocks ballooned by 44% compared to the previous year. This oversupply triggered a sharp price drop on the spot market, from $6.92 to just $6.05 per bushel. With profitability thresholds sitting at roughly $6.10, many medium-sized wheat farms in Kansas and surrounding states slid into the red, placing even more stress on rural economies. While Washington has described these shifts as temporary market pressures, analysts from Purdue University's Food and Agriculture Policy Research Center caution otherwise. They note that in the world of global wheat trade, outside of war or disaster, buyer memory is long. Once a miller switches suppliers due to concerns over risk, price, or quality, the odds of switching back within 5 years is estimated to be no more than 15%. If this pattern holds across the Philippines, France, South Korea, Mexico, and Italy, the U.S. could face a permanent export reduction of nearly 10 million tons annually. That would slash American wheat exports from the 2020 to 2022 average of 26 million tons down to just 16 million. According to the Chicago Federal Reserve's June 2025 agricultural letter, such a decline would trigger a $19.4 billion contraction in the Midwest's GDP and result in the loss of 45,000 additional non-farm jobs tied to agricultural infrastructure, logistics, and financial services. While U.S. trade officials are eyeing alternative markets such as India and Nigeria, both pose challenges. India operates a complex domestic price support regime that discourages large-scale imports, and Nigeria continues to struggle with infrastructure issues that make it unreliable as a high-volume buyer. In contrast, Canada's success isn't luck. It's the result of a long-term strategy put in place years earlier. Since 2021, Ottawa has invested $950 million Canadian dollars into its protein supercluster program, building a robust ecosystem that integrates producers from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta into a fully traceable, digital grain supply chain. This allows millers across the globe to scan a QR code on a shipment and instantly view real-time data on protein content, moisture levels, and chemical residue, offering unprecedented transparency and compliance with evolving import standards. Western Australia's CBH Group has since adopted the same model. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues to rely on a patchwork of PDF-based export certifications operating under a fragmented state-federal framework. This disconnect is a growing liability. To address the issue, the U.S. Department of Agriculture introduced the Strategic Grain Reliability Act to Congress in March 2025. The act proposes sweeping reforms, including automatic IoT integration for data collection, a fully digitized National Food Safety Lab network, streamlined export reporting, and XM insurance guarantees to shield exporters from beltway-driven political crises. However, the bill's future remains uncertain due to ongoing budget negotiations and partisan gridlock on Capitol Hill. This lack of clarity has already begun affecting the futures market. Wheat contract volatility on the Chicago Board of Trade has surged, raising the risk premium that international buyers must consider when doing business with American suppliers. As the uncertainty deepens, global millers and food processors are taking action, turning instead to suppliers who can guarantee not just price or yield, but also reliability and predictability. The broader message is becoming impossible to ignore. Across markets from Asia to Europe to Latin America, the geopolitical risk premium now outweighs the cost premium in global grain procurement decisions. Canada's steady policy environment, coupled with eco-conscious infrastructure, modern logistics, and deep traceability, has repositioned the country as a top-tier supplier. For the U.S. to regain lost ground, it must take decisive two-pronged action. First, it needs new midterm trade agreements that will shield the agricultural sector from sudden political interference and restore trust with international partners. Second, it must overhaul its tech infrastructure, transforming the fragmented state-to-federal certification process into a seamless, digitized system that rivals or exceeds those of Canada and Australia. If these reforms are delayed, the risk of a permanent decline in U.S. wheat exports grows substantially, with ripple effects not only across agriculture but also in transportation, rural finance, and public research funding tied to crop science and university extension services in the Midwest. What once seemed like minor logistical hurdles or short-term losses is now becoming a systemic challenge. The world is signaling clearly, in today's grain market, it's not the cheapest wheat that wins, but the most trustworthy partner. America must rewrite the first chapter of its export strategy with that sentence, or risk being left behind in the quiet but relentless global realignment already in motion. Thank you for watching. If you found this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps more people find our work. Check out the next video on your screen. We picked it just for you.